Yeah,
Oh crap, is right.
we didn't really plan to finish out our case, but it's got some tone now.
Right, so right. Well, that's a beautiful thing about having the wood.
Gravity is never.
Hey, Mike, just to let you know, I sent an
That's
email
just gonna
to
keep my wood
Stuart.
fluid or my wood
I
walls
made
dry
these
in my
changes to the resolution on this, just added our names and attested by Doug.
basement. Okay.
There,
Wouldn't give
the packet I gave you has those changes in it on the resolution.
Okay,
You want to see this?
Bill, right, just
did I get a
Herb Rose,
packet?
not a lot.
I thought you had one on your desk, so I didn't leave you one, but here's the,
Thank you.
I've seen it.
You seen it? Okay.
if anyone wants, there's a packet of documents they're looking at. I have 7 copies here. I can make more if need be.
Thank you. It's still warm.
Still warm off the copier.
Thank you.
I know Collins, save 2 if you would for Collins Jenny, they weren't far behind.
We need.
This does look like
Anyone
my
I'll
house.
sell them mine, I'll sell them mine.
I wanted somebody clear about one. Understand? Exactly right. I did the same thing in the fall, I asked Siri. Look what I got.
Are you on the investment committee?
I am. It says Walker.
Do you have a copy of what?
And Bill Kearns.
Do you have a copy of what you passed out?
Yes, I'm reading this.
I probably do.
If it's an
I think
investment,
I've got
then I need it.
everything that they had.
I'm all about that, I think it's
Yes.
good. You want me to sell you one, or what's it?
No, I came to back up.
We have a few other things that somebody didn't want. Is this everything? It's not stapled together, right?
Correct.
This is the final copy,
No, I actually made my own print, so this is the final copy. So you're good to
but
go.
I'm getting closer.
Yes.
All in the part?
Or who wrote this?
Stuart with Crowley Fleck.
Okay. Did he prepare the warrants for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The BHC board meeting is scheduled 10:30 on the 23rd.
The two.
Our board
Our
expo,
vote is scheduled on the 23rd.
10:30 on the 23rd.
10:30. Yeah,
And 9:30 for
our,
working session
yes,
for review.
that's correct. And so far, we have not come to agreement on the form.
I get that, so I've not done anything.
Sorry, it's 1:30, we're gonna come back, we're gonna recess, go into this working meeting. So, whoever wants to start off in the working meeting, go for it.
So, I guess I'd ask how we do this, having left the CEO and CFO right behind me, I don't know where they're at. How do you want us to proceed? To present what we know and talk about how we think we should proceed?
Well, that's what I'd say, and then the investment committee will be listening to it, and I think probably, I've already all heard it, but for formality, we'll go through it. Might be able to condense it down a little bit more from what it's been.
I don't wanna fill or kill time, but at the same time, I could take a few minutes just to bring up the investment committee up to speed, why we're doing this or what we're asking about. Would you find that helpful?
Sure. You don't mind.
So
The
who
latest-
are the
the latest-
members that are here from the investment committee? Okay.
We have an
Identify
email
yourself,
from
please.
Bill Kearns.
We don't know.
Eric Wilkerson, I'm superintendent at the school there.
And Chris
I
Wright,
do know you.
just a citizen,
I just wasn't.
Just,
just a citizen, now a landowner, yes, a landowner in the county.
Which will make him a taxpayer.
That's right.
And I guess you know, we have members here of the district board and of the hospital board. Do you want us to
I don't,
point those people out?
Hey, Bill, I would. I think it would help for everybody who might not know. And also to get it on the record who's here from which board.
Okay. I'm gonna switch to Kyle, but I'm gonna tell him where we're at then.
You can sit here if you want, this is for you, Kyle.
phone for
Okay.
Stuart to call him.
Okay, well then I'll proceed. Is it okay if I stand?
Yes.
I think most of us know this, but the district board is made up of the hospital district, typically elected officials who represent the county taxing district. And the hospital board are operational people on the hospital that oversee the CEO and the operations of the hospital. So the two are different. So first for the district board, I think Hugh is the chairman and Vic is the vice chairman. And Missy is the secretary, not elected to the board, but they're paid secretary. Darlene Doig is on the board.
There are two who are not Bob and John.
Okay, so help me out, if you would. The two who aren't here are.
John Ingalls and Bob Davis.
Okay. And then the hospital board, our chairman is Brad Campbell. John Nordwick is not here, who's our vice chairman. He was the CEO at Bozeman Deaconess for 15 years. I am the secretary treasurer on the board. Marcia, Georgia, Michelle, our board members as well. Am I missing anybody else here? And other people from the hospital who are here. You saw Kyle Hapstead, who's the CEO, and Jenny Klaus is the CFO from the hospital. Any questions about who the people are who are here? Okay, well then, as I said, I'll just, as we're waiting for Kyle to come back with his phone, primarily for you two, because the rest of everybody's heard this story before, but the hospital's asking for basically a bridge loan to help the hospital because we're trying to right-size the hospital. We have 42 beds, and since I've been there, they've never all been full, and so we're going to make the transition to a 25-bed critical access hospital. The changes how we're funded federally, and what happens to us is for probably a 6 to 9 month period, there'll be a leg on us getting reimbursed. And that leg, right now, after having a 6-month kind of slow period, puts us into a real critical cash flow period. And so we have turned to the county and asked them to make us this loan or this investment in the hospital. And we have, and I'll let the commissioners speak. I'll say what I think is true, but we believe the county has in investments bonds that are paying between 1 and 2.5% maybe of $10, $12 million. I don't know the exact amount. And so what we're asking is to instead invest about $1 million in the hospital, and we'll talk about how all that will work today. And the hospital is willing to pay 1% more, plus if there's a penalty, for having to cash one in early to make that investment. So there's the high-level view of why we're here and what we're asking about. The hows and whys legally, it's really, I say loan, that's how I think about it. But I think these are called warrants, and how warrants are issued and collected. I think that there's been a lot of discussion legally about can and can it be done. I don't, some of the questions I've seen legally, and again, I'm gonna look to Corey to help, or our legal counsel to help, but we're not asking the county to borrow money to give to us, we're asking them to use the money they have and invest in us. I'm sure there'll be discussion if you want to know more about risks and what's being put up. There's been questions from the public about, well, why don't you just go to a private lender and do this? Well, remember, we don't own our building and we don't own our land, so we have no collateral. The only collateral that's really involved in the discussion is the hospital district has the ambulance building, which will be used as collateral. And I guess when you start talking about the risk, Jenny and Kyle can talk about repayment. I know I've looked at the numbers, and making the payments back, actually next year will be less than the average we've paid for the last 3 years for debt service. So I feel comfortable in making it, but I think the risk of losing hospitals will cost the county much greater than the risk they're taking on the chance in investing on us. So that, I don't mean to put the sales approach on you as well, but that's kind of where we're at from a hospital board member's perspective.
If I can add one thing, when, at the last commissioners meeting that we were involved in, Doug Ellis was here and said the CDs that would be cashed into finance this were actually averaging about 1.6%, while the entire range of the investments for the county is in the 1.2 to 2.4. The actual CDs that would be involved were paying 1.6, and the hospital is offering.
Hey Stuart, we're in the middle of a discussion right now,
Right.
but we'll turn it over to you if you just want to listen for a bit, okay?
Tell me when you want me to,
When you want me to talk and what you want me to talk about.
Okay,
The
thanks.
nursing home and Silver Springs and the old assisted living up on the hill, there are 58 beds. And right now, there are 48 residents. So that's just something.
Where is this? Is this here or somewhere else?
No, here.
Okay.
We have Silver Springs, we have the hospital, and then we have the old assisted living up on the hill. And when you add the total number of beds that are available for elderly care, there are 58 beds. And there are only 48 residents total in all 3 units.
What Brad's pointing out is the business climate's changed, and we're trying to change along with that. If we don't keep the nursing home full, or very close to being full, the hospital will never be able to break even on it. All we can do is lose money. And so the fact that Silver Springs, an assisted living facility, was built in the county is good, not bad. And the fact that, and Serenity Point up in the hill has revived themselves, has changed our business climate as well. So some people who might have been in a nursing home are now in assisted living, they need less care. And so that's changed us as well. So that's why, that's one of the drivers that's making us want to move from a larger nursing home to shrinking it down just a little bit. And going to, as I said, a 25-bed critical access hospital, which changes how we get reimbursed for our operations. People in, if you haven't seen Kyle hold up the map, it's very complicated, but it basically lets us get reimbursement for all the square footage in the building, not just the 16% that's currently the hospital. So that person who's in the nursing home won't know that there was a change. The room will still look like it looks, their care will still be the same, but our reimbursement changes. And when that happens, we're gonna see this 6-month delay at least because of what's called the cost report from the federal government, or CMS actually, Medicare, Medicaid. So, that said, Kyle, what the commissioners have said is they wanted us to take over and explain what we were trying to do, so.
So we have Stuart Kirkpatrick and Megan from Crowley Fleck. Megan McGraw, I'm sorry. And I don't know, I think they've written out what a warrant investment might look like. And so if it pleasures the commission, maybe that's, with that brief understanding, maybe that's where we could go. Does that work? So, Stuart and Megan, we're at a little table here with Corey Swanson, and there's probably about 15 people in the room. But what we want to do is make sure that we, Corey and the commissioners, understand how this investment tool works for the county and BHC. Can you try to give us sort of a layman's understanding of how investment warrant would work?
Sure, I'd be happy to do my best. Commissioners and Corey, this is Stuart Kirkpatrick. I'm a lawyer at Crowley Fleck here in Billings, and Megan McCrae is an associate in our office. We're here and have been asked by Kyle and the hospital to assist in preparing some documents to support this arrangement. And I've spoken with the commissioners a little bit just in various telephone calls, but primarily have spoken with Corey and the hospital about some of these issues, and I think Corey has provided some good advice and has asked some really good questions to us as we've been working through this project. Last Friday, we sent a draft investment agreement over to Kyle for forwarding on to the county commissioners and to Corey. And if you are not aware, we over the weekend made a few changes and added a little bit of additional language in the investment agreement that I'm hoping you guys have in front of you. I don't know if you've had time to consider it, but since this is a working meeting, I thought we'd give you the most real-time information that we have available to give you an idea about how we perceive this arrangement to work. As we understand, County and Broadwater Health Center had entered into some discussions about how the county could effectively get some funds down to assist the hospital for operations purposes. Particularly, Kyle asked us, how this could be concluded, how this could be done. We essentially concluded that the county cannot directly loan funds to Broadwater Health Center. As you all know, a county has general governmental powers, and it only has those powers expressly or implicitly granted it by the legislature. And we're not aware of any express authority given to the county to directly loan money to Broadwater Health Center. The county can, however, invest in hospital district registered warrants under Montana law. A warrant is generally defined as a document conferring authority to pay or to receive money. So, in turn, the hospital district has the authority to loan money to Broadwater Health Center. So we have prepared then a transaction with two components to it. The first component of the transaction allows allows the county to invest in hospital district warrants that the hospital then, when it receives funds based upon those warrants, can subsequently loan down to Broadwater Health Center. and we've identified the way this transaction works in the investment agreement that we have sent to you guys. I don't know if you want me to go into the details of how that works, but the statutory authority is spelled out in the investment agreement that specifically allows the county to engage in the activity that we proposed in that investment agreement. I run that by Corey. I believe that Corey feels, and Corey, please correct me if I'm wrong, that there is statutory authority that permits the arrangement where the county can acquire hospital district warrants and then enter into a repayment arrangement for those warrants. At the same time, the hospital district has authority to loan funds down to Broadwater Health Center, and the funds that come up from Broadwater Health Center to the hospital district to pay on the loan could then be, if sufficient funds, would pay the timely pay the hospital warrant. So the transaction, I think, has legal muster.
Yeah, Stuart, this is Corey. I agree with your assessment as far as the warrant is the mechanism that would need to be used rather than the loan. I think depending on how you structure it as far as timing the chicken or the egg between the loan and the warrant, but the bottom line is that the hospital district has legal authority to provide funds to the hospital for operations so long as the hospital meets certain public health obligations, which it does. And then the statute allows the hospital district, if it cannot pay whatever the cost is, to basically make that a registered warrant, and then the county can purchase that. And that's in the, I had provided a memo last week to the county commissioners and to the hospital folks, and if anyone wants it, I have one copy here, I can get multiple copies here, but that's specifically allowed in the statute. And so the question is simply how you structure the transaction, number one, in terms of timing. And so, Stuart, I'm going to ask you in a minute to go over the documents that you've provided. I've printed a bunch of copies and provided them to the room. We're having a few more made so that anyone that wants one can have one probably in about five more minutes. But would ask you to walk us through those proposed documents that you have. And then I think the final question is simply, in that process of the investment and the repayment process for the registered warrants, what the county ultimately wants, I think, is how to ensure that they get paid back and in accordance with that schedule. That's really the $1 million question there. And so Stuart and I talked about that a little bit last week. I've reviewed both the documents last week and the documents from over the weekend, and those are what you'll have in your hands in a few minutes. But I'm looking to Stuart's I think expertise on some of these commercial transactions for finalizing some of those last issues and explaining them. So go ahead, Stuart.
Great, thank you, Corey. Now, for clarification, are the packet of documents that you are passing out the ones that I sent this morning?
That's correct. There was one more change that Commissioner Obert had suggested on a signature page on the resolution. So that is the version that everyone has should be with her recommended edit on the last page of the resolution.
Super, very good. I really appreciate that, and I know it was, we're rushing a little crazy, but I really appreciate you getting out the documents in real time. So the investment agreement, I did not send the loan agreement this morning. I didn't think that was the real topic of the discussion, but we can't talk about how that works out today. The document that I'm prepared to go through right now is the investment agreement that I think is being handed out. The investment agreement has essentially two components to it. The first component are the recitals, which I created to help frame out and explain the thing which this arrangement is occurring. And as I understand that the plan, the hospital district is intending on presenting to the county certain warrant or warrants, and I believe it would be a multiple warrants, totaling $1, $750,000 of which we call the initial warrants would be immediately available, and the county has agreed under this investment agreement to purchase those warrants. The county may also, if the hospital district requests, purchase an additional $250,000 in warrants that we call here the subsequent warrants, and that would be discretionary upon whether the hospital district determines to ask the county to acquire those warrants. And it could be an amount, by the way, up to $250,000. It doesn't necessarily have to be that amount. The way the matter works, we've added in kind of a section in section 3. Well, let's go through the agreement provision first. Under section 2 of the purchase of the warrants, the county would agree to invest in a creative fund that is going to be utilized for deposit of those monies that are going to be paid to acquire the hospital district warrants. So as soon as the district proposes that those warrants be purchased, that they would issue probably a series of warrants totaling $750,000. The payment arrangement, the way the warrant works is if you take a look at Exhibit A, I'm skipping around a little bit, but I'm hoping this is more helpful. If you look at Exhibit A, the sample warrant, it somewhat what the arrangement would look like. So the hospital district would deliver this warrant to the county, that would be accepted by the county and then registered. And that registered warrant then would be funded through a fund that's called, I think, the Hospital District Fund. That would be in which the money would be deposited. That money would be directed from the treasurer, the county treasurer, down to the hospital district, who then can in turn use those funds or loan those funds to the hospital. So let's take just an example from the hospital district warrant fund. Let's say that the hospital, that the county is going to accept $750,000 in warrants that the county expects to have fully paid within 5 years. If the hospital district is going to make installment payments on those warrants, but let's just say they make 5 annual installment payments on the warrants, then 5 would be issued, each with a total amount of the fully amortized payment of whatever the 750 divided by 5 is going to be, plus accumulated interest. So in year 1/5 of the principal, together with interest at an agreed upon per diem rate, would be paid. And then the second, and so what would happen is when the warrant comes due, then it would be presented back to the hospital district, and the hospital district would then pay the warrant and receive the original warrant back. And then in year 2, the county would present warrant number 2 to the hospital district that would be paid, and so forth. The amounts would be a set of accumulated principal plus interest at an interest rate that would be agreed between the hospital district and the county. And then when all 5 of those go, at year 5, if they want to be, if the county wishes to have its money back within 5 years, it would be paid principal of $750,000 plus the agreed upon annual interest. So it would essentially be an annual, an installment arrangement where you would make repayments of each registered warrant within that 5-year period. I hope I'm making on this. We have included the appropriate endorsement language in the document, and we have also indicated that this warrant is secured, and that goes to the next issue, Corey, to talk about. So if you go back to the original investment agreement on page 1 and 2, the idea about the warrant purchase arrangement is structured, and then paragraph 3 is how the warrants are registered and transferred. And actually, I don't know if they're going to be transferred, but certainly the registration of warrant provisions are incorporated on how that's going to be handled and who the registrar of the warrants is going to be and the like. Repayment of the warrants is identified in paragraph 4. It just requires timely payment on or before the date of presentment to the county in accordance with the terms of the warrant. They can be prepaid in whole or in part. If the warrants are prepaid, then I think what would happen is that the remaining warrants would need to be replaced to reflect the appropriate balance resulting from the prepayment. So in other words, if there is a payment of $100,000 that is due, which is the principal and interest payment in year 1, and the hospital makes $150,000, in order to appropriately for the accrued interest and principal, we'd have to issue replacement warrants, take back the warrants, and then distribute the remaining 4 warrants, if you make that payment in the first year, that appropriately amortizes out the payment of principal and interest, the remaining payment of principal and interest that may be owing. We struggle a lot with this issue because it's pretty hard it's pretty hard to calculate these in terms of any kind of prepayment obligation when you have a payment on a sum certain at a date certain. So we felt like the simplest way to do it, if there was a prepayment, which is allowed, is that we could just reissue warrants that reflect the appropriate payment. Paragraph 5 deals with the interest of providing some security for repayment of the warrants by the hospital district. The hospital district currently owns the ambulance building that would be willing to offer up as security for repayment of the obligation under the warrants. We're not saying that is 100% secured, but we are indicating that there is some security to support the repayment obligation. The paragraph 6 and 7 are essentially our representation provisions, where the county represents that they've appropriately approved this arrangement, and the hospital district would subsequently do the same prior to the completion of this transaction. The rest of the language is essentially standard boilerplate types of language that you would like to see in these types of arrangements. Exhibit A, as we reviewed, was the sample warrant. Exhibit B was a proposed trust indenture under Montana Trust Indenture Act. It's similar to a mortgage. The term mortgage makes a little bit more sense here, where you're granting a security interest in the in the ambulance building for repayment of the debt. And then the last exhibit is Exhibit C, which is the proposed resolution that frames out the arrangement and the terms under which the county would be entering into the investment agreement. I'm sorry to kind of labor on like that, but does anybody have any questions about that?
Stuart, this is Bill Upthegrove. I have a question for you. If the subsequent warrant, the $250,000, was issued, from the date of that being issued, would there be another set of 5 warrants for that repayment?
Yes, sir. You would do the same. The investment agreement contemplates that you would issue warrants for the repayment of $750,000 and warrants for the subsequent amount of warrants that are being
But
required.
Stuart, say they took out the 250 in year 3, that wouldn't be payable over 5 years. That would just be payable, right, over 3 years, because it's a total of 5 years. Just all that is the understanding.
I believe that's the way that yes, that's right. So when the warrants are issued, so let's say that the $250,000 was issued in year 4, then that $250,000 plus accumulated interest would be payable in the 5-year period.
Not over 5 years, but by the
Correct,
end of the
right.
initial 5-year period.
That's the
That's
initial
correct, yeah.
5-year period.
The term of the repayment of the entire let's assume that the entire $1 million would be issued in some warrants payable from hospital district by the county. Then the hospital district has an obligation to pay that entire $1 million back within 5 years.
Thank you.
So Stuart, this is Corey. This is the same thing we talked about on the phone last week. So this transaction obligates the hospital district to repay this. But what document or what piece of the transaction obligates the hospital to repay the hospital district and thereby the county?
Well, thank you. That's a really good question, Corey. The hospital district is loaning these funds, so they're passing directly through down to the hospital, and the hospital is then signing a loan agreement with a promissory note for repayment. As I understand the current arrangement, there's also an underlying lease that has been used as a vehicle for repaying all of the obligations that have been owed from the hospital to the hospital district, which I believe has been current, and the hospital has and Kyle can speak to this probably much more than I can, or Jenny, has not defaulted under those payments and has been made good on the payments that they've been obligated to pay back to the hospital district.
So that was that separate loan agreement that we looked at last week? Is that what you're
Yes, sir. Yeah, what would happen is, and it would be timed so the payment that comes up from the hospital would go to the hospital district, and then from the hospital district immediately over to the county treasurer for payment. So the timing of this would assure that the warrants are timely paid from the revenues that come from essentially the hospital.
And so what does the hospital district do? What's their remedy if the hospital can't pay?
Well, if the hospital district can't pay the warrant?
No, if the hospital cannot repay to the district and thereby the county, what's the remedy here?
The remedy is for the hospital district to default the hospital.
And then,
Seek payment from the hospital.
right, but then ultimately, I guess I'm trying to avoid an outcome where the county or the hospital district owns the hospital.
Yeah.
I think we're all trying to avoid that outcome. So
Yeah, and I don't think that the county ends up owning the hospital. I think that the hospital district ends up defaulting the hospital for the obligations that are owed. So I don't think ultimately that, I'm assuming that the hospital could assign its interest in the hospital to the county, but I have a hard time seeing that scenario if the county isn't going to want to receive the hospital as collection of the debt based upon default.
right.
Corey, at that point, I think what would happen, because the hospital district actually owns all the buildings, they'd have to go get a mortgage on the building. But at this point, our vehicle right now is a rent payment. We pay a monthly rent payment to the hospital district
Right.
in the amount of the debt service.
Right.
And then when their annual payment comes due, they've already got a whole fund set aside, ready to make that payment. There's no indication ever in the last 3 and even the last 5 years that we wouldn't be able to make that monthly payment. It's lower than our average payments have been over the last 3 years for the annual estimate.
I also think it's important to note, and I'm hoping I'm not speaking over anything, but this statute the statute that we're relying upon specifically talks about investment. So what the county is actually doing is investing in healthcare for Broadwater County, and I understand that investments always are never sure things. I'm sure you've had a chance to review POSs and OSs for bond transactions, and there isn't enough. There is a serious amount of statements indicating in there that this is for investment purposes, and there is risk involved, and there is risk involved in this transaction to the county. I think it would be foolish not to think that there is some risk involved because it's not secured, based upon. It's not a secure transaction to the extent that it exceeds the ambulance building, but it is an investment, and I that's important for everyone to acknowledge and to recognize that this is a decision by the county to invest in healthcare for the benefit of its folks in the county.
Does anyone have an idea of what the value of the ambulance building is? And I think it's the real property under it too.
Just to give you, we're looking at 2 properties across the street, the 2 warehouses, and
Uh-oh, we lost him.
did we?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay, we're back on. Just
I apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't. Was there a question I need to answer?
well, just what the value of the property. You could always get it assessed. The property across the street, we're looking at it's 2 lots, roughly around 100,000. The property, the yellow house, they're asking for 160,000. And the property that was knocked down on the corner was a terrible house. I'm sorry, but like 45,000. So I think when you consider the property and you consider what's on that property, you can always have it assessed, but it's at least $150,000 with the parking and corner lot and property that's on there. But you may want to have that assessed. So it's roughly about 15% down payment or collateralized for the county to work with.
What's owed on the ambulance building?
Nothing.
Nothing.
And it's important, I can hand this out to the commissioners here. In 2015, we made monthly payments of $57,000 and paid back almost $700,000 through that 12-month period of time. In 2016, we paid monthly payments of $44,879, and that was an annual payback for 2016 of $538,000. And in 2017, we actually are buying down, and we're at $38,000, paid off about $457,000. So with this particular warrant, we would be right in an interest investment. We'd be right between the top and bottom of about $43,000 a month that we've been able to pay for the last 3 years at an amount of about $543,000 over the year for 2018. So it's a good question. I mean, what kind of investment are you going to get? And what we're offering is at least 1% over what the CD is currently making. And we also think that that investment back in will be at a better rate than what you're at currently. So hopefully you'll make up a half to a full percent. And I think everybody wins on the investment.
So this is Mike Delder. I have a question on the repayment. The base agreement was that the district would repay the monthly payment sum for however long it took to receive the Medicare, Medicaid lump sum payment, and thereafter monthly payments would be made. How would that handle in the transaction of these warrants?
It would be the same, Mike. That's a really good question. Instead of if you did it on an annual basis, instead of you would issue 5 warrants. The first, as I understand it, the first warrant would be paid 1 year from the date of the execution of the investment agreement, and that would be a payment of accumulated interest plus 1/5 of the principal balance on the loan. The remaining payments then would be made in monthly installments, amortized over a period of 4 years, and then you would make those payments on a monthly basis, which means you would issue 4 times 48 specific warrants. So every month you would have that warrant come due. Another way to do that, if it was okay with the county, would be to do it on an annual basis, where you would only have to issue 4 additional warrants, and then those payments would be due. If you want warrants, we can issue 48 warrants. We would just put in those numbers based upon an amortization schedule that we ran out that would identify those payments. So it wouldn't be much of a pain unless there was going to be a prepayment, and then you just have to readjust all of the subsequent warrants. Another thing that we talked about, although it would be a bit of a pain, would be to set up a sinking fund similar to a bond transaction, where those funds would be paid into the district, and you would have access to that sinking fund, making sure that those payments were there, and then when the annual payment was due, you could make the payment out of the sinking fund to cover the payment. We can entertain any way that you want to do that. The simplest way would be to set up to do it on 5-year annual payments. The next simplest way would be to do multiple warrants. And then the third way would be to have a sinking fund that you could create that would be funded into the hospital district, and then when the annual payment was due, funds out of that sinking fund would go to make the installment payment. So it just depends on how you guys would like to handle the arrangement. We can accommodate any repayment methodology that you'd like.
Well, and Stuart, the beauty of having a county commissioner at all of our monthly board meetings is we can point out where the money's been parked, and they can reference that parking ability and make sure that we are doing and funding that payment on a monthly basis as well. So there's good cross-transparency in that way.
Ask a question.
I have some questions.
I brought up the annual payments because if there was gonna be a prepayment, then we'd only have to have 5 warrants that we would have to do, which would make it just make it simpler. But it really is not much paperwork at all because the warrants are identical. You would just put in re-amortize. The registrar, that would be somebody appointed by the hospital district that needs to keep track of all these things. That would be the person that would be tasked with some of the headache of trying to recover back and retire or accept those warrants back and then reissue new warrants with different amortization dates.
Okay. So Stuart, I have a question that one of our investment guys, and I know he wants
I have
to.
a bunch of questions, actually.
Go ahead.
My name is Chris Wright, and full disclosure, my wife is an employee at the hospital. But
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, I apologize.
it's Chris Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. Stuart, is it S-T-U-A-R-T or E-W-A-R-T?
It's EW.
Thank you. So, I have a couple questions. Number one, first of all, the underlying investment is what I'm interested in, because I'm on the investment board. As I understand it from meetings that you've attended, Kyle, last year with regard to how the hospital gets paid. Part of the money comes in from the hospital, which is reimbursed by the federal government based on the cost, right? But then you have the nursing home, which is a separate entity. And that money was based on how many people were in the nursing home. Some of them were on Medicare, some of them were on private pay. So there's a risk there with the nursing home, right? Because you might not fill it, where the hospital gets reimbursed for whatever its costs are from the federal government, period. Right? There's no risk there. So now what you're doing, as I understand it, is you're switching so that the people who are in the nursing home would now be in what would be considered long-term care beds at the hospital. And they would be subject then to the reimbursements. So if there aren't that many people in the nursing home part of the hospital, then you don't have the expenses that go along with it. You don't need, it doesn't matter, right? You're just going to get reimbursed for what your expenses are. But you're not going to run the risk of not having enough people to pay the bills because you've committed to holding 32 people but only 24 show up. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. All right. And now, but what that does is it changes how you're paid. So this would be like a person who was being paid weekly, getting a job that was suddenly they get paid once a month. And they just need some money to get through that first year or so.
Once every 6 months.
Right, okay. or like that, yeah,
Yeah.
because it's going to take 6 months. It's going to take a long time for this to kick in. But once it kicks in, it's actually a much more stable income because
Correct.
you're getting reimbursed for your expenses,
Correct.
right? So you just need a loan to get through this period where, and all the money that you're spending, the loan is not for an investment in the sense that you're going to build a building that hopefully you can fill with patients. And this is simply, you need money because the reimbursements are coming, but they're not coming in a timely manner. So the payoff is going to be when the government pays you the money for reimbursement, which is the only money you're going to spend out of that account anyway, right? Is money that's expenses, pretty much, right, to keep the place running. That's money, those are bills you're going to submit to the government, which in turn is going to reimburse you, but down the road, not in time to pay payroll, right? Is that? So there's really, I don't see the risk unless there's a risk with the federal, there's two risks. The federal government says they're no longer going to pay Medicare, pay these payments to the critical access hospitals across the country. Or you guys get the money and don't cut the check back to the hospital, or to the, like, thing back. Is that?
Correct.
Or if there's some other cost or some other thing that's unforeseen that happens to the hospital that impairs their ability to.
Right, but that's, all those costs, as I understand it, they submit to the federal government, who turns around and gives them the money back. One time you talked at a board meeting, or a commissioners meeting, and you said if there was, theoretically, if there was one patient at the hospital, it cost $6 million a year to hire the doctors, the nurses, and have everybody there ready to deliver services, but only one patient showed up, they would reimburse $6 million for that one patient, because that's what it costs to keep the hospital going.
If it was a Medicare patient.
Okay, right. And we're not going to get into, okay. So, but my point is, so there's going to be, hopefully there's one Medicare patient during the course of the year. So, at any rate, but that's basically it. So it's obviously theoretical. So basically all the expenses are covered, they're guaranteed to be covered by the government. So whether or not, so now it's a matter of whether or not Medicare is going to cover it. That's the investment risk that I'm looking at as the investment board of the hospital, of the county. I'm looking at investment. You're not looking for, like, hopefully that there's gonna be income. You're simply getting a reimbursement for expenses and passing that reimbursement back to the county because they fronted you the money. And
Exactly.
you're gonna give 0.5% interest? That's
1%.
I mean, I'm not sure, Corey, last year when we talked about the building fund, there were 3 county entities involved. There was the mosquito board, weed board,
Search and
somebody
rescue.
else.
Search and
Search
rescue.
and rescue and
Those
extension.
boards, right, so there's a mosquito board. How is the mosquito board different than the hospital board to the county? Is it the same kind of relationship? It's just another board?
Well, that's a good question. They have.
I mean, obviously, I
They have
value
a,
what the hospital does over what the mosquito board does.
so they have a district that, and they have a district and there's assessments on property values
Right.
within that district for those purposes.
Okay, that's how they get their income.
Right. And
But
then
doesn't-
there is also some potentially general fund money from the county for
Right.
their purposes.
And if they need equipment, the county might, we talked about, and what we talked about was if there was a loan, because the investment board, this is not the first time that the county has been asked to invest, to change where some of its investments are,
Right.
to fund something. This was that building fund was before. And what the plan was, as I recall, was we take each one of those entities that was gonna use that building, and they all were gonna come up with, but the mosquito board was gonna have to come up with money. The weed board was gonna, was it the county?
I
What's it
think
called?
they had some capital funds for each of those
But
boards
the point
already. I
is,
can't recall.
would we have done this, would we have done warrants with the mosquito board and warrants with the, you know?
Chad, this is Stuart. I can try to explain that. The statute under which these warrants can be issued
Yeah.
is very limiting on who the county can invest with.
Okay.
It can invest in county, municipal, hospital district, or school district registered warrants.
Nobody else.
It can't invest in any other board warrants. There's a very limited subset of those arrangements or those districts or boards that are entitled to issue warrants that the county can invest in.
Right.
And the mosquito board is not one of them.
Got it, okay, so you wouldn't have had, you'd have to do something different to give the mosquito board
Yeah,
money.
so for example, now the mosquito board retains, or they have a contracted service with a private entity that does some of the mosquito mitigation, and then the county employees do other.
Right, but the point was, you were gonna spend $600,000 on a building that the mosquito board was gonna use, and they were gonna be responsible for a certain amount. You know what I mean, it was like, that was, it doesn't seem much different. It seems like we're lending money to family here, as an investment guy from the county. It's just one of the boards that the county is gonna have a shortfall because of the way they're functioning. They're gonna make themselves more stable financially, but to do that, they need some upfront money, which they're gonna get reimbursed for, guaranteed from the government, if we can believe that the government can be guaranteed to pay money, right? But that's it, I mean, that's the risk, right? Okay, I'm just making sure that
Is
I'm
there-
clear on,
Is there any, I have a question on the license, is there any, what happens when you apply for this license change? Is it automatic
So
approval? Is there any?
the process, we have to do some public hearings because we're changing the license and withdrawing the nursing home license to 25-bed critical access. I've been told by the state that's about a 3-month process with Denver in reducing the beds. Generally, the federal government wants to get out of the nursing home business. They encourage the assisted living, home health services, hospice services. So they're more or less in a hurry to relicense you. And once the state gets the outcome back from the Denver office, it's a matter of days before they'll issue the 25-bed license. And again, this is an investment. We think that the long-term investment will yield somewhere between $400,000 to $700,000, depending on the utilization of the building by Medicare patients. It may actually get us, for the first time ever, into a position where we're not just a break-even facility, which is pretty exciting. And that has been the case with many of the critical access licensed, relicensed hospitals that have made these changes in the state. The other part, I guess, that's really exciting for us in this room is that, to my knowledge, it's the first time in 25 years, we have actually 7 patients inside the hospital today, being cared for in the acute care side. And I think it's a result of restructuring the way we cover the emergency room, the hospitalist needs, the clinic, and the personnel that we have on board. So